Welcome to the 3DownNation podcast. I'm Justin Dunk, joined by John Blue Jays fan Hodge today. He's switched up the Yankees cap with a Blue Jays one. Good on you, Hodge. Keep it Canadian, buddy. And JC Abbott. What do we think of Artie's fashion today, JC? Is it on point?
I think it's far superior with the Blue Jays hat than it was with the Yankees hat. I mean, things have cooled down a little bit, but didn't you know we were in a trade war before, Hodge? Come on now. Like you gotta be repping the Leaf.
I don't want to get political. Well, it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine when people are like, I don't want to talk everything is political all the time. But I just want to say, when I look at the landscape of the world around me, I sometimes think to myself, how did it get this stupid? How is it this stupid? And that's not to say there aren't some very smart people who are doing their darndest. I don't want to discredit them. But the amount of stupidity sometimes is astonishing. It makes me wonder how we are still alive, honestly.
That's going to be the most commented part of this episode of the 3DownNation podcast.
As it should be. Sounds good to me. Sounds good.
Let's try to stick to football. Okay, boys, we're discussing our top signings from Canadian Football League free agency.
The Calgary Stampeders releasing Demerio Houston after a domestic violence charge.
Patrick Mahomes wanting to check out a CFL game.
The BC Lions moving on from a couple longtime starters.
And Canadian defensive back Sidney Brown becoming a Super Bowl champion. But first,
the BC Lions were active on the first day of CFL free agency, which came as a surprise given how quiet the Leos were during the negotiation period, at least publicly. The team signed veteran quarterback Jeremiah Masoli, as well as Canadian offensive lineman David Foucault, linebackers American Micah Awe, and Canadians Adam Auclair and Adam Konar, as well as local collegiate star, shout out Simon Fraser University, Bryson John. As none of those transactions were reported in our last pod taping, what do you make of these moves?
Well, the first thing I made was, wow, the Lions are quiet now, right? Like all the other teams, all 8 teams had their moves by and large reported. And none of these came to light. I reported the Adam Auclair agreement, so that one was on the record, but nobody had them making these types of moves. So first of all, I'm going to start calling Ryan Rigmade, the club's new GM, Flex Seal, because Flex Seal is famous for plugging leaks, and that appears to have been his first order of business on the West Coast. I'm the GM. We're plugging leaks. We're covering this building in Flex Seal. And judging by the CFLPA survey, there's probably actually quite a number of physical leaks in the team's practice facility in Surrey. Maybe they can employ some Flex Seal there. I don't work for Flex Seal, but I've used it. It's a great product, just like it looks like in the infomercials. But getting to the football side of it, Jeremiah Masoli, I love this signing, right? We all know that Nathan Rourke is great. They're very high on Caleb Bryce as the back, or Chase Bryce as the backup to Nathan Rourke. But Jeremiah Masoli is not only a talented player, someone who makes the league better, I think, by being in it, but he's also someone who we know has been a very good kind of 1B, if you want to call it that, quarterback in this league. He shared the spotlight with Dane Evans for many years in Hamilton. He shared the spotlight, of course, in Ottawa this past year with Drew Brown, embracing kind of being that veteran, savvy, gritty backup for the first time in his career. So I like this move. I think that he can be a nice voice of reason for Nathan Rourke as he learns Buck Pierce's new offensive system. I think that this was an excellent move. I do also really like the moves in the linebacking core because, as JC expertly laid out in our last episode, they were pretty devastated there, right? This team started 2 Canadian linebackers for a long stretch in 2024. They have Bola Combo retiring. Ryder Vargas no longer with the team, was traded to the Toronto Argonauts. I think that unit, you don't have to worry about it anymore. If you are a Lions fan, I like the way that they strengthened that part of their defense.
I think you hit the nail right on the head with Jeremiah Masoli. Love that move for all the reasons you laid out. But the moves in the linebacking core actually caught me a little bit off guard. And I think this team now has a lot of flexibility there to go in a bunch of different directions. As you mentioned, two very talented Canadians leave the team in Varga and Lacombo this offseason. You bring in a couple of replacements in Adam Auclair and Adam Konar, who I think give you great depth behind Ben Haladic. But by acquiring Micah Awe, I think they're almost saying, we're not sure we're going to start Ben Haladic. In fact, we might prefer not to, because let's not forget, Ace Ely was fantastic in his rookie season last year in that linebacking core. And they've got a guy that a lot of people forgot about in Josh Woods, who got hurt early in that year, but looked in 2023 like he was going to blossom into a star in this league in the linebacking core. That's 3 starting caliber Americans at linebacker, and I would argue at least 2.5, because I think Konar is a little bit past it at this stage, but quality potential Canadian starters as well. They can mix and match and do any of those options that they want to. I'm surprised at the cost that they're spending at that position, though. I would have thought if they were going to sign Awe or make that move, that they would have either released Woods or Haladic before their offseason bonus in early February. They did not. They're on the hook for that money. It looks like they're moving forward with that group of 6, which will be interesting to see how it shakes out.
Ryan Rigmaiden talked about wanting to get more physical and mentally tough. It's hard to gauge the mentally tough aspect of these moves, but from a physicality standpoint, you include these group of signings and the ones that the Lions made before free agency, and it's very clear Rigmaiden has done what he said he was going to do. And largely, we see a lot of word salad sometime in professional sports and professional football, and even in the Canadian Football League. But Rigmaiden is a straight shooter. He said during his media availability, you ask me a direct question, I'll give you a direct answer. And that is refreshing in this league. So I give him credit for talking about what he was going to do and actually going out and doing it.
I do think it's worth mentioning the signing of Ryzen John. He was a standout at Simon Fraser, a program that sadly no longer exists due to, let's call a spade, mismanagement of that school's athletic program.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless, he is a 6'7", 235-ish pound target. He once got up to 255, 260 pounds as a undrafted tight end in the NFL, had stints with the New York Giants, stints with the Chicago Bears as well. Never saw regular season action, but was on the practice roster for a few years. Buck Pierce's offense is a run-first offense, or at least as run-heavy as you typically see in the CFL. The Bombers played an extra offensive lineman more than any other team in the CFL last year, often plugging in a 6th man at one tight end spot, sometimes even a 7th offensive lineman, the other tight end spot, if not a fullback. So Ryzen John potentially as a guy with a tight end background. They brought in Braden Lenius as well, a guy who played some tight end in college. I think that is a nice fit, especially if you could ever give him going. But I also do think he did nothing, right? The last 2 years in Calgary, there were ample opportunities for him to make plays with the Stampeders. And when he got rare opportunities to make plays, he did not do that. So I think this is nice for him to get to go home. I still think the potential is there, but I do think that this might be Ryzen John's last chance. He's got physical gifts. He's got tools. He's got to use them.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what his body looks like this year, how you're going to use him. Because as you laid out, he could be that pseudo tight end role that Javon Catoy has played and that Braden Lenius can play at times. You can utilize him in that fashion for the running game. Or if he slims back down to what he looked like when he played at Simon Fraser and he was so effective as a deep threat, well, then that body looks pretty damn similar to Justin McInnis, right? Who was a guy who, yes, now they've paid a lot of money to and led the CFL in receiving last year, but when they signed him ahead of the 2023 season, we were maybe talking about him in a similar way, not to the same extent. I think Ryzen John has had almost no production. Justin McInnis had a little bit of production, but certainly a guy who was viewed as a first-round bust and somebody who hadn't lived up to potential in Saskatchewan. The Lions were able to turn his entire career around. So Bryson John has potential to contribute in a couple of different areas. Also should be noted, David Foucault, I think, is a great veteran add. Doesn't necessarily start at right guard for this team. George Unga is going to get every opportunity to do that job, but I think at 36 years old, David Foucault is still playing at a very, very high level and will help this offensive line that has been a sore spot for the Lions in the past. With CFL free agency mostly done, it's time to pick some highlights. Hodge has challenged us to give 3 signings identified as particularly shrewd, either because they feature elite players, address a big need on a team, or include players who may outperform their compensation. Dunk, we'll start with you. Who are your 3?
I got Geno Lewis first and foremost. The Ottawa Redblacks get him for $97,000 less than he made a year ago with the Edmonton Elks, partly because he wants to be closer to his home in Montreal. But the major reason, I think, is because Lewis believes the Redblacks are a team on the rise, and he makes that offense even more dynamic than it already was. Look out for Ottawa on offense with Lewis in the fold. Number 2, Joshua Archibald. Joshua Archibald, let's try that again. An up-and-coming Canadian defensive lineman who saw time here and there with the BC Lions, but I talked to people around the league, talent evaluators, who specifically felt like Archibald could be a starter one day in this league and an impactful one as a Canadian. And then Danny Machocha compared him to a younger Isaac Adiemi Berglund who hadn't yet reached his potential. So he goes home. He went to university at McGill, so it makes a lot of sense for Archibald to go back to Quebec. I'm really intrigued to see how that plays out. Number 3, Miles Brown. This guy is an absolute physical beast, a constant disruptor in the middle for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and now he's signed with the Calgary Stampeders. I know Winnipeg Blue Bombers fans, and especially Zach Collaros, don't really like him too much, but he's a guy that will get in your grill and bring it down in and down out. Great value signing.
For me, my first one is Jake Ceresna because the Elks not only got him back after trading him to Toronto in 2024, but they got him for less money than he was offered by the Toronto Argonauts, which is pretty amazing when, as a non-playoff team, you can poach someone from the reigning Grey Cup champions and even pay them a little bit less. Jake Ceresna, for me, is the most disruptive defensive lineman in the CFL, inarguably along the interior, possibly across the entire line. So I love that for Edmonton. That D-line is going to be a problem. They should be able to get pressure with 4, which was so much of the reason why Toronto had success this past year. I also love the Deshaun Amos signing. This one stood out to me. The Hamilton Tiger Cats secondary let them down in a bad way, I thought, in 2024. They needed fresh blood. And I love the fact that Deshaun Amos has ties to new defensive coordinator Brent Monson from their time together back pre-pandemic with the Calgary Stampeders. There's trust there. Amos is a leader, and I think that he will help secure that spot. I know he's traditionally played the field side halfback spot. I'm sure Amos can slot it at the boundary side as well if necessary. And my last one is Jarrett Stearns to Winnipeg. Stearns, I think, is almost a guy with Sean Bain Jr. like potential. Sean Bain Jr. signed, of course, in Calgary, spent 2 years there, was kind of a depth guy, somebody who was in the background a little bit, was overshadowed by some star receivers in Cowtown, and then exploded when he got to Saskatchewan. And I think that Jarrett Stearns has the potential to do the same thing going from Saskatchewan to Winnipeg. He's not a burner, right? And he's not somebody with a huge imposing frame, but he is somebody who can get open on second down. He's somebody with great hands. And something that I don't think a lot of CFL fans know is he had one of the best seasons in the history of collegiate football. I believe it was at Western Kentucky before he came up to Saskatchewan as a guy who put up almost 2,000 yards in a single season. And I don't think that any talent evaluator at the professional level should forget about that, because that shows the type of potential he has. Yes, it's Western Kentucky. It's not Oklahoma or Alabama or Clemson. But still, he is somebody who, as a raw rookie with the Riders, had a nice, strong season in 2023. I understand why they didn't keep him, because they've had guys like, whether it's Bain, whether it's Sam Emelis, whether it's Keyshawn Johnson, whether we're talking about Kean Schaefer
Kean
Baker.
Schaefer-Baker.
They have so many
Mitch
guys
Picton,
who are stepping up,
Dale
making
Duncan
plays.
Busby.
But I think that with Ontario Wilson in the NFL, I think with Kenny Lawler in Hamilton, Dalton Schoen coming off a torn ACL, this is potentially an excellent value add for the Blue Bombers.
I loved your pick of Miles Brown, Dunk, but I'm going to go with the guy that Brown replaced last year in Saskatchewan's rotation, Anthony Lanier, going to Toronto. I know he had a down year, but I still think there's value there with Lanier, especially if you're getting him for a lesser dollar figure. He's one of very few guys who can rush inside or outside effectively, and Toronto was desperate to replenish that defensive line. I think that's a very shrewd, high upside signing for them. Peyton Logan in Winnipeg, I'm shocked that Hodge didn't pick him as one of his favorite signings based on the way he talked about this move last week. I think returner was Winnipeg's biggest problem last season. Logan's not necessarily going to go out and win most outstanding special teams player, but he's going to give you competence and some explosive plays at a spot where the Bombers simply didn't have anything going positive last season. That will be a big shift. He also gives them some nice flexibility behind Brady Oliveira to do some interesting things on offense. But my favorite signing is the guy who's going to line up next to Jake Serezna in Edmonton after lining up next to Jake Serezna in Toronto. That's Jared Brinkman. I think this guy is one of the most underrated players from a fan perspective in the CFL right now. He's an exceptional run defender. You could argue he may be even a better player overall in terms of how good he is against the run than Jake Serezna is. Doesn't bring the same amount as a pass rusher, but is a very clinical football player. And the kicker, he's just 25 years old. We all know that that's not even in the prime yet for CFL pass rushers or CFL defensive linemen. He's got many more productive years to go, and I think he is going to be an absolute stud of a signing for the Edmonton Elks.
For Lanier, I need to see it to believe it. The one positive going for him is that Jason Chivers will be his defensive coordinator, and that's when he was most effective in the Canadian Football League, was under Shivers. But let's not forget, Lanier by the end of the season was a healthy scratch on Corey Mace's defense. If you can't even make the lineup on Mace's defense, I just can't understand how you're going to bounce back elsewhere. Perhaps it's a new team that will infuse new energy and he's not getting paid as much as he did in the past, so that will light a fire under him. This guy was a healthy scratch on a unit that had guys on rookie contracts fighting, scratching, and clawing for playtime. So I need to see it to believe it in terms of the value with Lanier to Toronto.
My least favorite signing, I'm adding one here, was Jacob Zott to the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And this is the reason why. And I want to make it clear. I think Jacob Zott is a good player. I interviewed him when he was coming out of McMaster. I've stayed in touch with him a little bit. He's a really nice guy. His dad works in construction. You know, he's a tough guy. The reason I hate the signing is Jacob Zott at just 26. Just 26. He was a fourth-round pick to the Red Blacks, by the way, in 2020. Has already been a part of 6 different CFL teams. Like, this guy, at his age, he's on pace to do the full Kevin Glenn cycle by, like, age 28. But he's already been in Hamilton before. Like, he was in Hamilton in 23, dressed for games. Now he's back there. He needs to be in BC. He needs to be in Calgary. And he needs to be in Toronto. And Toronto's even his hometown. That's where he was born. That's where he went to high school. So this was devastating to me personally. I thought it was a travesty. I'm frankly upset with everybody involved, including the Tiger Cats, Jacob, and his agent. We need more guys going for the Kevin Glenn all 9-team cycle. And this was not productive in that regard at all. I want to see Jacob Zott playing for other teams. Teams he has not been. That means he's already done Ottawa. He's done Montreal. He's done Winnipeg. He's done Sask. He's done Hamilton. He's done Edmonton. No repeats. Just new teams.
Now Narioshi knows it's his fault.
It is his fault. JC, you recently reported that Calgary Stampeders defensive back Demerio Houston was charged with domestic violence, and the team, as of Wednesday, has officially released him. What can you tell us about the situation?
Well, the old saying goes, actions speak louder than words. Well, the Calgary Stampeders and the CFL both declined to comment, both before and after the publishing of our article on Demario Houston's charges. But the Stampeders, of course, today announce his release and make their statement in effect on the situation. It's unfortunate anytime anything like this happens. It's a misdemeanor domestic violence charge in the state of North Carolina. Allegedly, a dispute between him and his wife. He was asked to leave, and then he hit her in the face with a suitcase. None of this, at this stage, has been proven in a court of law. He has a disposition hearing to start the process in earnest in March. But clearly, as we know with how the CFL operates when it comes to gender-based violence and their very strict policy, sometimes moves are made before anything is heard in a criminal court. And clearly, the Calgary Stampeders have decided that this whole process is not going to be worth the trouble for a guy who, just a season ago, they paid a boatload of money to come over because he was the CFL's leader in interceptions.
I'm going to say this as carefully as I can, fellas, because first of all, JC, kudos to you for digging into this nugget and reporting it on point. I just have trouble understanding why the CFL and teams in this league are reactionary when things come out publicly and don't treat it the same if it didn't come out publicly. That's where I'm going to stop. You can read into that what you will, but I cannot for the life of me understand, because Randy Ambrosie, as commissioner in the league office, likes to trumpet the gender-based violence policy. And I'll leave it at that.
Something I noticed while looking at Demerio's Twitter account is that on January 15th, so this was during the CFL's off-season winter meetings, he posted a photo of him in his Calgary Stampeders hoodie standing beside Dave Dickenson. And the caption is, quote, "Coach Dave pulled up to the city, so I had to pull up on him. Hashtag go Stamps," then a horse emoji, a heart emoji, and he tagged the team. And this, of course, is because Demerio lives in North Carolina. That's where these charges were filed. And, of course, the CFL had their off-season winter meetings in Charlotte this year, which coincides with the annual American coaching. I forget the acronym, but it's the big annual coaching football carousel that I think is smart, by the way, that the CFL has paired the winter meetings with that event. Hopefully we're getting new and exciting ideas for coaches, or even recruiting some new, fresh American coaches up to the CFL. I would just question, and I don't know the answer to this, I would question if Dave Dickenson knew of these charges by this time. I would think that as a team, during the season, especially during the offseason, you would have consistent efforts in place to learn of any information such as this that came up regarding any of your players. Let's remember, these charges were filed in mid-late November of 2024. This tweet was posted in January. There have been instances where players have, for pretty significant periods of time, kept things private from their team. I don't know if that was the case here, but I do think that it is a shame that it took these charges to be reported for the team to do something about it. At least that's the way it appears. And I will also express disappointment, by the way, in the fact that we are still the only journalistic outlet, the only publication that has reported on this. I Googled this morning in all kinds of creative ways. Has any other newspaper, journalistic publication, anybody touched this? The answer is no. Now that the Stampeders have released Demerio, I'm assuming they will. But when these charges, no, they're not proven in court. It's just a charge. But when these things happen, they are newsworthy, and fans deserve to know about them. That is why we reported the story, and I also want to commend JC for doing a great job on the story. But I agree with Justin. These things need to be more proactive, and though our media landscape is shrinking, which does limit resources, I fully understand and appreciate that. I think the media as a whole needs to do a better job of shining a light on these stories, because this should not have been a 3Down exclusive. As much as we obviously love having exclusive reporting, this should have been covered more efficiently by other outlets, and it wasn't.
The last thing I'll say on this topic is you can think what you want about this particular situation. You can have varied opinions on the way the CFL enacts a gender-based violence policy and whether they should be harsher or less harsh. Reasonable people can disagree, but nobody should take any pleasure in a situation like this and seeing a player get released, even if what you think what he allegedly did is heinous and unforgivable. The reality is, in the documents of the case, the alleged victim says, well, there were previous incidents and I chose not to come forward because this was my only source of income, was my partner playing in the CFL, and I didn't want to risk endangering that. He has 3 small children with his wife. He has 2 children from a previous relationship. Despite the fact that he was, I believe, the 10th highest paid defensive back in the CFL last year, Demerio Houston got a public defender, said he was unable to finance his own legal defense. This is clearly not a family situation where there is a lot of disposable income. And unfortunately, that's not going to get any easier here. It's a terrible situation all around. And regardless of your thoughts of the charges, nobody should take pleasure in how this is played out. Former Atlanta Falcons general manager and University of Guelph alum Thomas Dimitroff believes the CFL could survive an NFL expansion team coming to Canada. Does he have a point, Doug?
He might have a small one, but people I've talked to about the NFL coming to Canada don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime unless something massively changes. And I would politely disagree with my University of Guelph brethren that if an NFL team came to Toronto, that would be the only market that the NFL would look at in Canada. Sorry, Vancouver, that's just the facts. That I think it would have an impact on the Canadian Football League. There's only so many dollars to go around for professional football in this country. And as much as people don't want to hear it, it's true, especially in Toronto. The CFL is seen as second rate for whatever reason. I'm not saying it is, but the attendance would tell you otherwise. I do think it's elite professional football. There are only 41 teams, arguably. JC, I know you're going to talk about your global boys over there. So I'll say, let's say in Canada and the United States that play professional football where you can earn a living, that you can feed your family, so to speak, year round on. I do think it would have an impact on the Canadian Football League. And based on, as I said before, people that I've talked to, they just don't see it happening. Like, people will tell you that, the NFL doesn't really have to do much in Canada, and they get, what would it be? In and around $100 million for the television rights up in Canada. They have to do nothing, no marketing. Like TSN, CTV, DAZN does it for them, and they literally don't have to do anything. Yes, there's NFL Canada who's out there on the ground here and there. But when you look at it from that standpoint, it starts to make some sense. And I had smart people tell me, fellas, that unless you hear any talk about an NFL level stadium, then you can't even have the conversation about an NFL team in Canada.
Yeah, I've done the cocktail napkin math before, and keep in mind that I have literally no accreditations or experience working in the business world, so I'm not the right one to analyze the sports media landscape. I literally just play one on television and learn things in kind of a cursory way while covering the CFL and to a lesser extent the NFL. But my cocktail napkin math indicated that with the exchange rate, given what franchise fees have cost, we don't have an expansion fee since 2002 when the Houston Texans joined the NFL. But with the exchange rate from US dollars to Canadian dollars, with what recent stadiums have cost, and keep in mind that Toronto is one of the most expensive cities in the world. Like, I don't think this stadium would even be in true Toronto. It would be off in a suburb somewhere. the cost would be about $10 billion, right? We discussed this a little bit with the Rogers shakeup, with them purchasing the stake of MLSE that was previously owned. I think is still technically owned by Bell Media. But we're talking about like a $3 billion expansion fee. We're talking about probably $3 billion for land, another $2 billion for a stadium minimum. And that's like $2024, $2025. So if this were to happen in, let's say, 5 to 10 years, which is I agree, the closest timeline, the shortest possible timeline this could happen, it's going to cost far more, right? I don't think this will ever happen. I also will say, by the way, if Toronto, and I agree with what Justin said, I do think that in Toronto, the vast majority of Torontonians don't even know the CFL exists. And those who do consider it a second-rate league. I do think there are some exciting opportunities for the CFL outside of Toronto, right? The CFL works really well in Hamilton. It always has. Well, guess what? Kitchener-Waterloo will soon have the same number of people as Winnipeg, right? There are other communities that 20, 30 years ago would have been far too small to support a CFL team and are growing so fast and at appearing to be a sustainable rate that you could conceivably have multiple CFL teams in Southern Ontario. If it doesn't work well in true Toronto, it doesn't have to work well in true Toronto. But I'm not sure what to make of these comments. Thomas Dimitrov, no disrespect, I'm not sure he has a solid lay of the land for what the CFL does in terms of revenue. I'm sure he's very smart. He was a good NFL general manager for a decade in Atlanta, helped get them to a Super Bowl. But I don't know if he knows the numbers. And if he doesn't know the numbers, then I don't know. I'm glad he answered the question. Good for him. But I don't know if we're supposed to put any stock into this.
Yeah. And for the record, he didn't answer the question. He raised the query himself and proposed himself as the future GM for an expansion franchise in Canada. Let's be frank, that's not happening. And I think Dimitrov was out to lunch with some of these comments. Now, where I do think he is correct in theory is if the NFL expanded into Canada, the CFL would survive in some capacity. The NBA is in Toronto with the Raptors. The CEBL still exists and can draw out fans in different markets to varying degrees, right? There are successful minor league baseball teams in this country, the Vancouver Canadians, the Winnipeg Golden Knights, despite the fact that the Blue Jays play in Toronto. People from coast to coast don't rally behind Toronto teams. In fact, we generally hate them because we think most people in Toronto are a little bit pompous and self-important. So I don't think putting an NFL team there would all of a sudden rally the country behind them. But could the CFL, without the biggest market in the country, stay as a league as large as it is, as important as it is, with a $6 million salary cap or whatever the inflationary equivalent is at that point in time? I don't think so. I think it would shrink in some capacity. It would probably see salaries go down. It would probably see its place in the market go down because it would have less value on broadcast television if there was a true CanCon NFL team. That would hurt the league. But like the proverbial cockroach, 3-down football will always survive.
During Super Bowl Media Day, Patrick Mahomes told BC Lions play-by-play man Bob Marjanovic he'd love to come up and check out a CFL game. If you were to recommend a game to Mahomes, which matchup and why?
There's only one matchup here, right? And I'm taking the stadium into account. I'm taking the matchup into account, the atmosphere into account. It's the Banjo Bowl. You got to come up to Winnipeg when Saskatchewan comes to town. I think Labor Day in Regina would be a close second. I do think that their stadium is not as loud as Winnipeg's. I do think it's more beautiful than Winnipeg's. But that's the matchup, right? Those games sell out at 30,000 people plus. Nobody else in the CFL does that consistently. It's the best rivalry in the CFL. I think it's especially cooking now that these two teams just played in the West Final. You got some Rider fans pretty upset that the Bombers are magically breaking the salary cap every year, allegedly. I don't know where they get that, but that's what they claim. And you got Bomber fans upset that Miles Brown, who, albeit is no longer with the team as of today, is hitting Zach Collaros up high and hitting Chris Treveler down low, right? So I think that is the matchup you should come to. I'm not suggesting that other matchups wouldn't be interesting, but to me, that is the matchup that you should come to if you're coming to one CFL game.
Look, that is the best, most exciting game to come and attend to. I'm not going to argue that, but the context of Patrick Mahomes' comments is he wanted to come up and watch a CFL game that one of his two buddies from Texas Tech, Pete Robertson or Micah Awe, was playing in. Pete Robertson, of course, not currently on a CFL roster, but Micah Awe just signed with the BC Lions. That means he's got to make his way out to Vancouver. I think you do week 1 when Edmonton comes to town, because there'll be another concert from Amar Doman. Pack in that BC place. You get to watch Nathan Rourke, who he's previously praised on Twitter, sling the rock. You get to watch his former teammate play on that BC Lions defense. I think it's a perfect scenario, unless, of course, Amar Doman manages to snag Kendrick Lamar as that pregame concert. Then there might be some PTSD for Mahomes. He might want to stay away in that circumstance.
No. We can't have Kendrick Lamar performing in Canada. And for the record, that Super Bowl halftime show put me to sleep, okay? I do think that JC's on point here, because Amar Doman would probably like to have Patrick Mahomes to make it an even bigger deal for the home opener, if indeed he's going to have another concert. And he'd probably give a little Skrilla to Mahomes to come and do it. There's only two logical places where Mahomes would go. It would either be BC because of the aforementioned Micah Awe signing there, or Winnipeg because his good buddy Travis Kelce knows that franchise quarterback there, and Zach Collaros might say, hey, we should go up to the Peg in the offseason, check it out. You know, my boy's the quarterback. He can show us a good time in the Peg. Maybe, Hodge, you could try to tag along or play paparazzi if Mahomes came to Winnipeg.
What I would do is you have to get Travis and Patrick Mahomes up to Canada, and then I would dress like Jason Kelce and see if anybody noticed that I wasn't him. Because I have gotten that comparison many times. The first one to make it was the late Ted Wyman, R.I.P. Ted Wyman, longtime reporter for the Winnipeg Sun. It was the first time that Jason did commentary on ESPN, I think it was, on the panel there. Anyway, the next day, Ted comes up to me, just like, I was watching that game yesterday. I was thinking the whole time, this guy's reminding me of somebody. Who is it? And finally he said John Hodge. That's right. So that would be my game plan.
Hold up. John Hodge before he
Before,
shaved his head.
Well, yeah, but I also wear a hat basically everywhere I go. So and Jason Kelce does largely.
Just saying.
Jason Kelce shaved his head once.
He has shaved his head before.
He did it as a bit.
Hodge, it's another argument as to why you should let your hair grow back in. You had great coverage. You could be a Jason Kelce lookalike. They've had competitions like this in Philly. You could fly down there and be part of Fly Eagles Fly Nation, baby. They would love you. They love their Jason Kelce lookalikes.
Eagles fans scare me a little bit, but I do greatly admire their pride and their enthusiasm and their proclivity for climbing light poles, whether they are greased or not, and whether or not the mayor has demanded or at the very least strongly urged them not to. But
let's be real, boys. The real way that this should come together is Amar Doman goes out and does his thing and gets Taylor Swift to be the opening day concert act for the BC Lions game. Patrick Mahomes comes. Everybody's happy. Perhaps Travis Kelce shows up. Then go to Winnipeg another time.
Yeah, he could just land the biggest musical act in the world. That's
what Amar Doman does. He had Prince Harry there, for goodness sakes, at the Grey Cup. He had Prince Harry.
Prince Harry's hosting the Invictus Games. Prince Harry wanted to come. That's why he was promoting.
Why wouldn't Taylor Swift want to come? She was in Vancouver not too long ago.
Yeah, to make billions of dollars with sold out venues.
I don't know about billions. I'm sure Amar Doman could.
She's a very, very wealthy woman with a very, very busy schedule.
I do think that Vancouver's a good idea. And if Patrick Mahomes really enjoys the city, then he could buy a 1,200 square foot bungalow there. That would be great. It's now time for Hodge's heritage moment. On this day in 2020, the Hamilton Tiger Cats signed receiver Demerio Posy to a free agent contract. The 2017 Grey Cup MVP was coming off a year with the Montreal Alouettes, during which he recorded 50 receptions for 780 yards and 3 touchdowns in 12 games. Posy never got a chance to suit up for the star-studded Ticats in 2020 due to the cancellation of the season amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The Ohio State product later joined the BC Lions in 2021, but played only one CFL game there to end his career. JC, would you call Posy the most random Grey Cup MVP ever?
I don't know if he's the most random, but he's certainly up there. And I say that with great love for Demerio Posy. When he spent some time out here in Vancouver, I have a mutual friend who I was coaching community football with, and Demerio Posy used to come out to our games and then tailgate in the parking lot with us afterwards, after we beat the snot out of some other group of 11-year-olds. So Demerio Posy is a quality human being, and he may be the most random Grey Cup MVP.
He was a Grey Cup MVP because he had a 100-yard touchdown catch in that 105th Grey Cup. A memorable play in the snow to upset the Calgary Stampeders, if my mind serves me right. And wasn't Shania Twain the halftime act for that one?
I think she
Yes,
was.
she was.
That was a great Grey Cup, man. I get what you're going with random, but I don't think he was the most random ever. He made a key play in that game.
Random doesn't mean bad. And I'm not saying that I'm just saying, like, when you look over the list of Grey Cup MVPs, right? Like, you see the Doug Flutys and the Zach Collaroses and the Anthony Calvillos. I'm not sure if 20 years from now we're going to look back and be like, oh, of course, Demerio Posy was a Grey Cup MVP. That's more what I mean by random. But to me, the most random Grey Cup MVP of all time will and for always will be who? 2007? Saskatchewan Roughriders? James Johnson. Bingo. No disrespect to James Johnson. He was a West Division All-Star that same season in 2007. But this is a guy who only played 4 years in the CFL. Ironically, he ended up in Winnipeg after helping Saskatchewan beat them in the Grey Cup. But yeah, James Johnson, when you look at the CFL history books with all the Grey Cup MVPs, I think James Johnson will always be the name that sticks out most, is going, wait, who? Like a DB? Like, how often is a DB the MVP of a championship game? I'm not saying it shouldn't happen. I'm just saying it happens extremely rarely.
He was
Didn't
at
he
least
have 2 picks in that game?
He had 3.
Three. Like, that's what I like about it is the real MVP was named.
True.
It's either a quarterback award, which it seems like it is. Like, we should just say who was the best quarterback in the game and give them a trophy and have a real MVP award. Now, there was lots of talk and debate about Enoch Mwamba a couple of years ago in 2022, whether he should have got it or not. But, James Johnson makes me think he was the actual real game MVP.
I agree with that. And I still, by the way, don't agree that Enoch Mwamba should have won that Grey Cup MVP. I love Enoch. Great player, great career.
Nothing against Enoch.
And him standing on that stage in tears holding both of those trophies was amazing. I don't know why his TSN panelists tease him about that. It was like one of the best moments I've ever seen in a Grey Cup. I don't know why anybody would make fun of him for that, but whatever. But yeah, I'm not convinced that he was the best player on the field in that game. People forget he dropped a go-ahead interception in the fourth quarter. And when you get 2 balls thrown right at your hands as a linebacker and you only catch one of them, I don't think that makes you the best player in the game. I don't.
Let's go to the 3-minute drill, boys. The Toronto Argonauts have signed former Saskatchewan Roughriders defensive lineman Anthony Lanier II. Can he regain his old form in double blue?
Well, you guys both talked about it, so I'll talk about it. I do think he can, right? He knows this defense. Yes, he clearly fell out of favor a little bit down the line with Saskatchewan last year, but they had a ton of depth on that D-line. He's going to need to be a presence with the Argonauts after the losses they've had. I think he can. BC Lions GM Ryan Rigmaiden, a.k.a. Flexio, told the media longtime Leos Suk Chung and TJ Lee will not be back with the team in 2025. Was it smart for the club to cut ties?
Yes, it was. It breaks my heart to see TJ Lee go, but the team needed to get a lot younger and a lot faster in the defensive backfield. And Suk Chung, as much as he's a popular local character, well, he hasn't been good for very long. So they needed to upgrade at that spot. badly. London, Ontario native Sidney Brown is a Super Bowl champion. Were you happy to see him win the NFL championship game with the Philadelphia Eagles?
Of course, man. It was awesome to see, considering his backstory with his brother Chase Brown, who's a running back for the Cincinnati Bengals. You got to Google it and check it out. Going through multiple homes as children, they didn't use anything as an excuse. And now Sydney gets to hold that Lombardi trophy and do all those wild celebrations in the city of brotherly love. NFL broadcaster and CBS Mornings co-host Nate Burleson said during Super Bowl week he grew up dreaming about playing for the Calgary Stampeders like his dad, Al, who was, I believe, a defensive back for the team. How cool is that, Hodge?
It's super cool, and I think it helps break down this narrative that some people have been trying to push in recent years, where it's like, well, Canadian kids don't grow up dreaming about playing in the CFL, and then guys like Chuba Hubbard or guys like Nate Burleson, who have had great NFL careers, or in the case of Chuba, is actively having a great NFL career. And you ask them, they're like, oh my God, I love the CFL. I would love to play in the CFL. It's an amazing league. So obviously, given the money involved, everybody would pick the NFL. I don't think anybody in their right mind would say, I could play in the NFL, but I'm going to play in the CFL. If they did, they should be committed. But that doesn't mean that just because it's not the first choice, that these guys wouldn't love to play in the CFL. And it's awesome that Nate Burleson felt inspired as a child watching his dad play. Alexander Hollins is still a free agent after being cut by the BC Lions. Will the former West Division All-Star sign another CFL contract?
Frankly, I'm surprised he hasn't already given the upside, but we all know Alexander Hollins' struggles. I think teams are going to be wary of that situation. They're going to be wary of his health, given that he just had both knees scoped. And I think the other element here is Hollins in the right headspace to sign a contract. He can be a little mercurial at times, and I think being cut by the BC Lions may have sent him for a loop. He ends up somewhere eventually, I'm sure, but probably not at the monetary figure that he would like. With Kenny Lawler now in Hamilton and Keandre Smith getting a big raise, will Tim White be back in Steeltown in 2025?
It seems like that's possible, but the Ticats don't owe him any money on his contract this year until training camp with a report and pass bonus. So that gives Ted Gavaya, the general manager, some time to ponder the decision, if it even is one. Winnipeg Blue Bombers quarterback Zach Collaros called the late CFL salary cap increase, quote, absolutely ridiculous, close quote. Thank you for speaking your mind. We need more quarterbacks involved with the Canadian Football League Players Association. Is he right, Mr. Hodge?
Yeah, he is right. The fact that the cap is going up this much is great news for everybody. The fact that league revenues is up is great news for the league. That is all super positive. The timing of this, however, was messy at best, and I think that did hamper some of the positivity that should have come from this very exciting announcement. Last one, the Saskatchewan Roughriders have signed former Stampeders center Sean McEwen, a 3-time All-CFL selection. Is that a good move?
I think it is a good move. Sean McEwen, dare I say this, I think he may be a little bit overrated at this stage in his career, but he's certainly a starting caliber center. He's going to be a capable replacement for Peter Godber, and he gives the Riders options on that offensive line, whether they want to go with 3 Canadians or potentially 3 Americans. They will have a good starting unit.
We thank you, as always, for listening to the 3DownNation podcast. Don't forget to subscribe. Give us a 5-star rating on your podcast provider. We'll be back next Wednesday for another episode. For Justin Dunk and Jumbo Cheese, I'm John Hodge. We'll see you next time.